All right. It looks like we've got everybody currently has a seat, so thank you all for helping us with that, and thank you for your patience. My name is Caitlin Hoff-Mahoney, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Matheson History Museum. We are really delighted to be hosting the author Richard Gartee today to tell us about the history of the Hippodrome Theater. As you can see, he's written a really wonderful book. He came in to do some research for that at the Matheson. I feel like it was a couple years ago. So this is a project that's been in process for quite a while, and it is a really wonderful resource for our community. So before we get started, I have a few housekeeping things. First, I want to thank our sponsors. We are grateful for the ongoing support of Visit Gainesville, Alachua County, and I want to be extra special to thank them today because we have, as one of our speakers this afternoon, Jessica Hurov, who is let me make sure I get this right, the Tourism Development Manager for that department. So we're really grateful that she's here to share about her experiences with the Hippodrome, as well as Mark Sexton, who is also helpful with that grant. So thank you very much to Visit Gainesville. We are so grateful for your ongoing support. We are also supported by the City of Gainesville and the State Division of Cultural Affairs. So we are funded through those grants for our programs and exhibits. And then we also are funded by our members and donors. So if you like what we're doing here, I hope that you will take a few minutes. We have Willett here at the back table, who would love to tell you more about becoming a member of the museum and also sell you one of the books that we have today. So Richard, before I turn it over to him, he is a long-standing local author here in Gainesville, and this is his 27th book that he has published. So we are really looking forward to hearing more from Richard today.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin, and thanks to the Matheson for having me. Thank you all for coming. Before the Hippodrome moved to its present location in downtown Gainesville, was a ghost town of abandoned stores. This book, the Hippodrome's 50th year history, chronicles how the spirit of great theater saved a dying downtown business district and became the city's cultural icon and the centerpiece of its artistic community. Let's start on Hawthorne Road. Okay, what if it doesn't go there? There it goes. So let's start on Hawthorne Road in a former plumbing supply store. The location was off the beaten path, not the 4-lane highway that you would see today if you went down Hawthorne Road. It was a 2-lane road that many in Gainesville never traveled unless they were going to Crescent Beach. Once they had the Hawthorne Road location open, their second production there was Neil Simon's The Odd Couple. It had been a Broadway hit, but not yet played in Gainesville. The production garnered Hippodrome instant praise and recognition from Arlene Greer, the theater critic for the Gainesville Sun. She wrote, "There's cause for rejoicing among Gainesville theater goers. A new company which calls itself the Hippodrome Theater has opened its doors, and word is, hurry, do not walk to the Hippodrome to see a highly skilled, irreverent bunch of zanies do their thing in the season's opener." Hippodrome co-founder Greg Von Hosch recalled, "She single-handedly put us on the map." Subsequent plays also received good reviews, with Arlene's urging, "I would advise any of you who have not yet made the journey to the Hippodrome to do so forthwith." Hawthorne Road venue seated only 60 to 75 people, and within 2 years they needed more space. George Fitzpatrick offered a warehouse on Northwest 43rd Avenue and US 441, a little closer to town, but not that much. Back then, there wasn't any businesses on 441 north of Dubs. I was waiting to see how many people recognize Dubs. The 8,400 square foot floor space allowed them to seat up to 375 people per show and still have room for office, dressing rooms, prop set, and a workshop. That's even larger than the capacity of the present theater. But the seats weren't fancy. Many were old church pews. The seating platforms could be moved around to reconfigure the stage, and ceiling height allowed creative sets such as the Tempest, where they erected a ship mast that swayed over top of the audience during the storm scene. But the tin roof on that building made it impossible to hear during heavy Florida rainstorms. They actually would stop the play till the rain quit. While the warehouse productions got even better, the Hippodrome's reputation grew. In 1977, they got the right to Equus. The show had been a smash hit in London and later on Broadway. Hippodrome co-founder Greg Harsh said, Equus was the hallmark production. Nothing we had done up to that time come anywhere near that. Gainesville audiences agreed. Equus brought a new level of excellence to the Hippodrome and won the theater's statewide respect. The play opened September 30th, 1977, and was held over repeatedly into November. With Equus, the Hip really raised the bar. Meanwhile, downtown was going in the opposite direction. When the Gainesville Mall was built on Northwest 13th Street, major department stores like, this is Equus. When the Gainesville Mall was built on Northwest 13th Street, major department stores like JCPenney's, Sears, and Silverman's abandoned their University Avenue locations. Their smaller neighbors went with them. The old post office, situated at the south end of Southeast 1st Street, had no draw for visitors. A decade earlier, the U.S. government listed it as surplus property and leased it to the Alachua County School Board for 20 years. The board used it for office space and storage. In the mid-1970s, the Gainesville Sun, then located behind the post office, was looking to expand. The idea of demolishing the old building to make room for the new was floated. Nearby, the Duck Pond area and Sweetwater areas were also targets for modernization, and there was a discussion of putting a major road through those areas. Citizens banded together to establish historic districts and protect certain buildings by getting them placed on the U.S. Department of Interior National Register of Historic Places. The city tapped UF College of Architecture to develop a comprehensive plan for downtown under the direction of Harry Merritt. And they built the Community Plaza, which we now know as the Bo Diddley Plaza. But the city didn't have enough money to finish it. So a group of citizen volunteers laid the bricks. The Hippodrome's first contribution to revitalizing the downtown wasn't when they moved to the beautiful Beaux Arts building they now call home. It was in 1976. To celebrate the U.S. bicentennial and its own centennial, the Gainesville Sun held a week-long event in the new plaza. They invited the Hippodrome to perform two gentlemen of Verona there. There was a water fountain in the center that kids would play in. The Hippodrome built a frame over the fountain so they could perform the play in the round. The event drew crowds. A year later, on October 24th, 1977, the City Commission received a detailed feasibility study from the College of Architecture, renovation and uses of the old post office. The report included pictorial design for turning the building into a performing arts complex. The city's original thoughts were that the Gainesville Little Theater and the Hippodrome could share the space, but neither theater group was crazy about that, and eventually the Little Theater dropped out. The Hippodrome's artistic co-directors and board of trustees met with Merritt and concluded that undertaking the renovation was a possibility. But getting the building wasn't that easy. It took 2 years and a lot of money and cooperation of local businesses and government entities. In January 1978, the Hippodrome launched a letter writing campaign through its subscribers to demonstrate building support for such a project to the City Commission. Over the next few months, Greg Hausch and Hippodrome business manager Jim Peoples traveled to Washington, D.C. 3 times to meet with U.S. Senators Richard Stone, Lawton Childs, U.S. Representative Don Fuqua, and several officers of the National Registry of Historic Buildings and the National Endowment for the Arts. The Alachua County School Board, who held the property, met in February 1979 to discuss the building's value and voted to have the property assessed. This delayed negotiations with the city. If the deal went through, the school board would also have to relocate 53 district employees who worked in the building. It took until July 1979 for the deal to be settled. The U.S. government transferred title to the school board on a quitclaim deed, and the city commission approved $150,000 to purchase it from them. Still up in the air was the lease between the city and the Hippodrome. On July 10th, 1979, the old post office was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, forever eliminating the question of its demolition and making it eligible for federal restoration grants. In November, the NEA awarded the Hippodrome a $175,000 challenge grant exclusively for renovating the building interior into a theater. More money than they had ever seen, but it came with strings attached. The Hippodrome had to match it 4-to-1 with money they raised themselves. Another caveat, they had to raise the first $175,000 by July of 1980. Then in January 1980, the City Commission unexpectedly approved a final version of the lease. The city was looking for the Hippodrome to reverse the decline of downtown. I think the city will be well pleased with the effect we have on the downtown area, said Hippodrome Chairman Richard Gartee. The Hippodrome immediately hired Al Dumpy as project architect. On March 16, 1980, the Hippodrome kicked off its official fundraising drive with a ribbon-cutting ceremony on the steps of the old post office. With Representatives Don Fuqua, Director of Cultural Affairs Rebecca Kirshner, Gainesville Mayor Bill Howard, and State Senator George Kirkpatrick. And in the back, right in the center there, is Bruce Cornwell from the Hippodrome. Once the fundraising got underway, the Hippodrome tried everything. We tried wet hippo nights, wet water nights, skeeter biscuit eating contests, roller skating, scavenger hunts, hippo fun run, a hippo sock hop, concerts, raffles, contests, parties, car washes, and benefit performances. TV 20 also broadcast a hippothon, but it wasn't enough. Greg Hausch recalled, we raised $350 on an event and then spent it all on the next event. We were getting nowhere. So we hosted a thing at the Hippodrome out in the warehouse. We hosted a thing at the Hippodrome for a few corporate entities that we had. Dick Gorenberg gets up. We have all these charts of what it's going to look like, and he's talking and talking and talking. Their guests listened from church pews that made up much of the seating in the warehouse theater. Bob Hester, who was president of First Federal Mid-Florida, blurted from the audience, I'll give you $50,000 if I don't have to sit on these pews again. Are you serious, Bob? Yeah, I'm telling you right now, I'll give you $50,000. Greg calls that the turning point. If it wasn't for Bob Hester, we would have never made it. We needed somebody to step up and say, I'm going to make a legitimate donation. After he did that, then doctors, lawyers, law firms, hospitals, and everything started catching on. The Hippodrome's first public event in the post office, a fundraiser on May 31st, put them over the first goal set by the NEA grant 1 month ahead of the deadline. And on June 30th, they signed the lease and started working on the building. Throughout July and August, the Hippodrome had 350 volunteers put in 15,000 hours of labor getting the third floor ready. On September 1st, the Hippodrome moved its administrative offices downtown location, but the theater portion wasn't even started. So the fall productions continued to be staged at the warehouse. By September 15th, contributions totaled $326,933, and MM Parish Construction began converting the second floor courtroom into the main stage theater it is today. They hoped to open their January 1981 play, The Elephant Man, in the new theater, but they held off building the set because they weren't uncertain if the theater construction would be finished in time. The stage downtown is smaller than the stage at the warehouse was, and depending on which space they were going to be used, it would have to be a different size set. So the Hippodrome board remained uncertain about the completion and kept delaying their decision. Finally, 10 days before opening, they told the crew they would be opening downtown. With Herculean effort, the contractor finished. New seats were installed, the set was built, the stage lights were hung, and the show opened on January 16th, 1981, with a special gala performance. The Elephant Man, an emotionally charged drama, had won the Tony Award, the New York Drama Critics Award, the Obie Award, the Drama Desk Award, the Outer Critics Circle Award. It was currently in its second sold-out season on Broadway, yet the Hippodrome had secured the rights for its southeastern premiere. The Elephant Man was another milestone that raised the bar for the theater in Gainesville. Every night of its run, audiences moved by the intense, touchingly truthful production rewarded the players with round after round of applause. Reviews in the Gainesville Sun, Ocala Star Banner, and Florida Times Union were uniformly effusive in their praise. Hippodrome supporters who had given generously to turn the old building into a wonderful theater watched in awe as top-notch talent delivered a performance that rivaled Broadway for excellence. The new theater was off to a great start. Their next play again scored a southeastern premiere, a new comedy drama by Harold Pinter, Betrayal. They had negotiated directly with Mr. Pinter's English agent and solicitor to obtain the production rights. That was followed by the award-winning For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. The number of subscribers increased. This was important to revitalization because it established in patrons a habit of coming downtown frequently. In June, the Hippodrome remounted the Elephant Man, which brought new people downtown who had not been to their January performance. In another coup, the Hippodrome got Neil Simon's newest Tony Award-winning play, I Ought to Be in Pictures, which had just opened on Broadway in April 1980, and the Hippodrome already had performance rights. The play further boosted subscribers. Adding to its prestige, the Hippodrome was named a state theater in September 1981. That fall, workers completed renovating the first floor into a lobby, gallery, bar, and second stage theater. The gallery offered free exhibit space to Florida artists and became one of the key stops once the monthly art walks began. The theater filled the gap between their productions with live music and dance performances. A Hippodrome promo brochure stated, each year the Hippodrome produces over 300 art events, theater, music, film, dance, storytelling, and visual art shows. Moving the Hippodrome downtown was doing exactly what the city hoped it would. The area was becoming a destination, and people who came there wanted to have dinner before the show or a drink afterwards. Previously abandoned stores became restaurants and bars and art galleries. Even the Hippodrome's annual charity performances of A Christmas Carol proved effective at bringing people who hadn't frequented the area before. Think of all the parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents who came to see their little darlings in the cast. Okay. It was so much so that there were lines around the building to get tickets. Yet it wasn't just the restored Beaux Arts building that brought crowds. It was professional theater company producing plays that one could only find in New York or London, maybe Atlanta or Chicago. Tony Award-winning dramas such as Amadeus, To Kill a Mockingbird, Diary of Anne Frank, musicals like A Chorus Line and Evita had their runs extended repeatedly, showing the power of the theater to draw far more than their subscriber base. We could spend the afternoon naming the great works the Hippodrome has brought to Gainesville, but I won't. The central thesis of today's talk was that great theater performances are what drew theater goers downtown and brought about its revitalization. By 1984, the Hippodrome had 5,000 subscribers. The total attendance for the 1997-1998 season was 75,000. In the summer of 2002, Honky Tonk Angels brought 16,000. It doesn't always go when I click it, sorry. In 2002, Honky Tonk Angels brought 16,000 people downtown. in 2006, the Great American Trailer Park musical sold 21,548 tickets. Yeah, a round of applause for the Hippodrome. All right. Now, all of this and more is covered in my book, which you can purchase today from the Matheson back there. But right now, I'd like to introduce two former general managers of the Hippodrome who will offer additional insight and comments on the impact the Hippodrome has had on downtown Gainesville, Mark Sexton and Jessica Hurov. Mark acted in Hippodrome plays starting in 1977 and served as general manager during its most explosive period of growth from 1996 through 2004. Mark is presently communications director for Alachua County government. Jessica Hurov began her career at the Hippodrome as a marketing director in 2005. She was later promoted to general manager and later became managing director from 2014 to 2018. Jessica is presently tourism development manager for the Alachua County Visitors and Convention Bureau. Mark, you want to start?
We were not quite. I'm sorry, you have to buy that now. Thank you all for coming. We're delighted at the turnout here. One thing I wanted to mention was Trailer Park Musical that I think sold the most tickets of any play at the Hippodrome. That was Jessica's first show as the marketing director before she became general manager.
Yeah. That show has a great story too.
Okay.
Lauren Caldwell, the artistic director, went to New York, saw the Great American Trailer Park musical, and said, "I have to bring it back to Gainesville. It's set in Stark, Florida." And at that time, Dave Schlenker from the Gainesville Sun said, "What are they doing? They're going to be making fun of people from Stark." And actually, it was the best thing that could have happened because it helped us spread the word. We would never make any fun, and the show sold out every performance. So brought great revenue to the theater that summer.
And artistic director Mary House just said, "Keep doing that" to Jessica. I thought I would, we didn't really have anything planned, so I thought I would just kind of start with my experience. I was a student at FSU, and I heard about a fledgling theater group in Gainesville, Florida, called the Hippodrome. I knew enough to know that Hippodrome meant a giant venue where you could hold chariot races and giant events. So I later learned the Hippodrome was kind of a joke, the name initially, but they grew into it. I heard they were doing a play that was a hot property in New York called Equus, and I came down with a friend. I auditioned for the part of the young boy. He auditioned for a horse. I got the role. He was sent out to pasture back to Tallahassee. But it was an extraordinary experience, and it was in the warehouse. I never experienced the Hawthorne Road Theater, but I did experience the warehouse. Fast forward several years into 1989, I had come back to Gainesville and I had just finished my degree at UF, and I got a job as a temporary subscription telemarketer at the Hippodrome. 6 months later, I was the director of development at the Hippodrome. 3 years later, I was the general manager of the Hippodrome. So that was my kind of evolution. I got to experience from afar the extraordinary efforts by the founding members of the Hippodrome to secure the building downtown. It was an extraordinary experience because there were ideas floating around from my understanding. And one of the reasons that I think the Hippodrome was successful was not only the grassroots effort, but it would have been extraordinarily expensive to change the use of that building into a private sector business because of the codes and all of those things. So the timing was just right for this. The name of this is How a Theater Saved Downtown, the name of this discussion. What now? Great theater. I had a talk on Saturday with a dear friend of mine named Linda McGurn, and thank you. I'm going to suggest that a great theater was the heart of the downtown redevelopment and the downtown resurgence, but I'm also going to suggest that there was an incredibly brave couple named Ken and Linda McGurn that came in right at the heels of the Hippodrome and redeveloped the Sun Center around it. Their projects started coming in rapid succession. They completely redid the Opera House where Harry's now sits. They redid the Union Bank or Union Street Bank up on Main Street. They developed Union Street Station. Mike Warren, Nathan Collier, Billy Scheel, there was an extraordinarily brave group of developers and private business owners that came in, and the Hippodrome was a fuse that was lit that led to this explosion of businesses downtown. So it's very important to remember that private business were partners in what became an incredible ignition of the downtown area. The incredible thing about the 90s was, in 1980, when the Hippodrome became part of the state theater system, Becky Meacha and other board members were instrumental in that effort. But it opened up all kinds of financial support from the state of Florida. The Hippodrome was getting historic preservation grants, education grants, all kinds of grants, not to mention the state theater, which was serious money at that time. And this was in the 90s when the state of Florida was second only to the state of New York when it came to funding the arts. That's not the case anymore. The arts are being funded at a fraction of what they used to be. And I guess it has something to do with the nature of politics in Tallahassee these days. But in the 90s, that really started to snowball. The Hippodrome's budget was approaching $4 million at one point in the 90s, and the audiences were exploding, and we just kept building on what the original founders had put together. At the time I came in, I think Mary Hausch was the last of the original producing artistic directors, and she completely changed the model so that she was the producing director. Lauren Warhol Caldwell, I know her as Cindy Caldwell, and then Lauren Caldwell, and then Lauren Warhol Caldwell, and now just Lauren Warhol. She was the artistic director, and I eventually became the general manager. And that was an interesting model, and it worked. And it freed up the artistic folks to focus in on the art. And general managers like Jessica and myself, we were able to focus on the business side of this. And that's, again, where Ken and Linda McGurn come in. Ken and Linda would say yes when I would ask them for their donation, with the stipulation that I would be the president of the Gainesville Downtown Owners and Tenants Association 3 times. And through that, we had the time and the energy and the staff to really expand sponsorships. Almost every business downtown was involved in the Hippodrome in one way or another. The Chamber, Mike Warren, Nathan Collier, Ken and Linda, of course, Billy Scheel, and all the individual businesses. If you couldn't afford to give money and you had a restaurant, then you catered the opening night party at least once a year. So it was an incredible cooperation. I'm noticing the Great Southern Music Hall banner up across here. And when Richard was talking about some of the musicals that the theater did, I think it's an important part of the history to recall that Evita and Chorus Line were actually done in the Great Southern Music Hall. So the Hippodrome was always able to take their show on the road. Actually, Equus when it went on tour in the state of Florida, it actually came back to Gainesville, and we performed it at the Great Southern Music Hall. The first play at the Center for the Performing Arts was West Side Story, which was produced by the Hippodrome. And it was an original production of West Side Story that opened that facility. I'm gonna turn over to Jessica, but before I do, I just wanted to say someone who is not here with us today, and when I see some of the actors in the audience like Kevin and Nell and Greg Jones, I think some of the people in the audience will remember Mike Doyle. He played the psychiatrist in Equus. He played Salieri in Amadeus and many other just signature roles at the Hippodrome. The main stage theater is named the Mike Doyle Theater in his honor. And just want to take an opportunity to say hi, Mike, wherever you are. Also, I wanted to just point out one story when Nell and Greg and I were actually in a show together called Sylvia. The worst break I ever had on stage was when Greg, who was playing a psychiatrist of undetermined gender, I asked him if he was a man or a woman, and Greg Jones's voice dropped 2 octaves lower than I've ever heard another human's voice sound like. And he said, "I let my patients determine my gender, Greg." And I was in full laugh for the next 5 minutes on stage. It was humiliating. Jessica?
One of the things that really struck me in thinking about today is how many people it takes to make a professional theater run. And I'm looking out in the audience and seeing so many of them. So everyone here who is either a former employee, actor, director, donor, if you could just raise your hand and acknowledge yourself. So, because I see so many of you out there. Including my mother. And I see in the back Michael Curry, who is longtime Hippodrome board president. And I really see Michael too as just such an unsung hero of the theater. Many people don't know the number of days I would be at my desk and Michael would climb the stairs to the 3rd floor, and just seeing his face and seeing his presence would make the whole thing feel like we can somehow carry this through, because everybody here knows carrying the Hippodrome through is not always the easiest task. So like Mark, my history with the theater started in 2005. Unlike him, I was never an actor. And actually, when I first interviewed at the Hippodrome for the marketing job, Rocky Drought at the time said to me, "Are you an actor? Do you want to audition for plays?" And I said, "No, my last play was 3rd grade Paddington Bear." And I will never, that was it for me. So I think that was actually the answer he was looking for. They didn't want an actor who also wanted to market. They wanted a person fully focused on generating revenue and patrons for the building. And that was my full goal. I really see, and I think it connects to the story of downtown. What the purpose is bringing bodies to our downtown area. And just like Richard said in his talk, once they come to the theater, they also spend money. And I believe the Americans for the Arts says that when a person attends a cultural presentation, they'll spend about another $78, after that at one of our restaurants or coffee shops. And that is really what can bring those businesses the kind of patronage that they need to survive. I will say this, Richard, the billing of today's talk is how it saved the downtown. I don't know if it's fully saved. It is an ongoing process of saving. And, just like if we have a child, you can't say, "I have fed it, I created it, and we're good now. You know, I truly feel that the Hippodrome, to me, and I said this to Richard when we talked about his book, the Hippodrome to me is a living, breathing entity. What it needs to survive is people, and it needs revenue. The revenue comes from, just like you saw in the presentation, our government, the state of Florida, including the Division of Cultural Affairs. It comes from the county, it comes from the city of Gainesville, and then it comes from our private donors, our businesses, and our patrons. And so when we're looking at just that model of how are we diversifying and increasing the revenue to be able to create that excellent programming that the theater is known for, we can never stop, and we can never reach a moment where we say the theater is saved. I think the theater needs to be saved every day. And the people who step foot in there, and I see a lot of them here, Bobby, now, I mean, all the people who have spent time there and work there know the work never stops. So I hope that people return to the theater. I know that during COVID, people got out of the habit of theater. People, you know, rightly so, needed to protect themselves from being in enclosed spaces with one another. But just like Richard showed with the subscribers, subscribers are the bread and butter of a theater. When you have a strong subscription base, you know you have maybe 30% of your audience already secured for the run of a show. The funding that subscribers bring helps you make costumes, make a set, pay those actors while they're in rehearsal before you're actually having a show and bringing an audience in every night. So I encourage all of you, go back to the theater. There's a musical on stage now, just like every summer, and think about subscribing. And really, you know, if the people do not come, the theater cannot continue to be what it is to downtown. And I truly think that community is the people. And when the people can come together into one sacred space, which is the main stage at the Hippodrome, and all participate in hearing a story and experiencing joy, pain, tragedy, laughter together, that's what makes us human and elevates us out of, you know, the daily grocery run and getting gas for the car and everything else. So I think that, you know, beyond the economic importance of the theater, there's the spiritual importance of the theater. There's the creative importance of the theater. The theater has sustained amazing artists for generations, and we want to be able to continue that for the children and the next generation. So that's my pitch. Get off my soapbox, but thanks for having me, Richard.
Good job, Jessica. Good job. And Mark, thank you both. We'll have time for a little Q&A. If you have questions, we'll be glad to try and answer them. The other thing that I mentioned the time frame between Mark's turn as manager and Jessica's. There was another person in between. That was Rocky Dowd. And one of the things that Rocky told me that kind of tags on to what Jessica was saying about subscribers was that having the large subscriber base also helped the Hippodrome get some of these wonderful plays, that they could be in negotiation with an agent or a playwright in New York or London or someplace and say, we'll guarantee you 5,000 seats if you give us the contract, or 3,000 seats, or however many subscribers they had. So to a playwright who's just like hoping to get 100 people to show up at the Circle Theater would be just quite happy to sign over the rights to his play. So that was an important part that subscribers played. And again, this is a passion project for me, this book. And if I've been going to the Hippodrome since 1976, 77, and I'm a great lover of live theater and of the Hippodrome and of all the performances I've seen there. So I echo Mark and Jessica's comments that you should indeed go down and